Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Daily. We are glad you made it. We have some really important information to share with all of you. This is stuff that will absolutely impact you as the veteran, whether you're getting ready to get out of the military, you've been out for a little bit, or you've been out for a long time, but not just for us, but for our survivors as well. Because as we all know, the more conditions that we have rated with the VA, the better off we're going to be for now and for our future dependent situations. So with that, what we're going to be talking about today is presumptives, and we're going to touch base on several different windows of presumptive abilities for you. But first, we want to talk about, what does a presumptive condition look like? And does that mean you're out of luck if you can't file a presumptive, right? What is the difference between them and how does it work? So I'm going to give a quick overview, Clay, if you don't mind, and then I'm going to kick it over to you for some of your additional thoughts and to pick up any of the pieces that I happen to leave on the ground. So with that, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, share with a friend, all that good stuff. Truly appreciate it. Helping this channel grow is really important for the community. At least we believe that that is the case. Having this dialogue type of format really helps cement some ideas that we have. So it's a good thing. So thank you guys so much for doing that. All right. So I think first what has to happen is we need to explain quickly what a regular type of a claim looks like, a standard claim with the VA in the fastest version for you, because that's not what this video is. And I know we run down the rabbit hole, so I'll try to condense it. A standard claim with the VA entails proving that you have your time in service, proving that you have a condition diagnosed, right? You can't self-diagnose. You should go to the doctor, get a diagnosis for your condition that's chronic in nature or has some sort of residual impacts to your life, an ongoing problem. The third thing is the nexus, that link between those two, your time in service and the condition. Now, the VA isn't specifically looking for, show me the military caused this. That's not really what they're saying. We tend to think that, but that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is, show me that your condition manifested during your time in service or is a result of your time in service in some way, shape, or fashion. Now, you have to provide evidence on all this stuff. And believe me, I get it. It gets hard sometimes because we didn't document anything when we were in. So then you're in this boat of manufacturing evidence and Nexus letters and all that stuff, which we've done videos on that, and you can find 1,000 other videos online or read as well. The difference now between filing that type of a claim and a presumptive claim is the presumptive conditions for your specific time periods in which you served eliminate the need for a nexus. That last piece, you don't need to prove that your condition either manifested during your time in service or as a result of your time in service. The VA just concedes and says, you know what, if you served from here to here in this location, then if you have this condition, we're just going to give it to you. So you don't have to go through all the heartache of trying to prove anything about the condition being service connected, which is huge. This eliminates a huge burden off of us as the veteran community. And oh, by the way, Clay, not only if you're trying to file a claim for service connection, but also if you're a surviving spouse and your veteran who passed away had one of the presumptive conditions that either contributed to the cause of death or was the cause of death, that is the key to get you approved for dependency indemnity compensation. You would file a claim with all the same type of information, proving that the veteran served in X location during X time frame and was diagnosed with hypertension. They passed away from a heart attack. On the death certificate, it says death due to heart attack, contributing cause, hypertension. And now you get dependency indemnity compensation, which the base pay on that is about just shy of $1,700 per month and could go upwards of $3,000 or more per month from that benefit. So presumptives are very, very important and near and dear to my heart I guess, benefit for veterans and surviving spouses. Clay, I want to get your thoughts on that since I rambled for 5 minutes. Please shed some light for us.
Yeah, so you covered everything. What I would like to add are frequently asked questions around presumptives. So if you have sinusitis because you were in Afghanistan, that only pertains to service connection and has zero bearing on the percentage given. I think a very common misconception is, oh, they only gave me 10% because I was an Afghan. It's like, well, relax, you got 10% because of 38 CFR criteria. So you have presumptives, which are passed by legislation, like the PACT Act is a law. It's not a claim; it's just a law. Then you have conditions. Those conditions still follow the same 38 CFR criteria, just like everything else. So presumptive basis just means the nexus that isn't medical; it's presumptive in nature. I still like to use the big three when it comes to presumptives. The in-service event, it kind of goes away, but it's replaced with, hey, I was in this country at this time. Got it. The current diagnosis is the most important thing needed for every single claim. You have to have the condition, it's got to be chronic. And then the nexus is no longer linking the condition to the in-service event. The nexus is assumed by the VA. So that's presumptive. Another commonly asked question is, I was an Afghan, and I'm using Afghan as an example. There are many countries and different criteria that are time based, not location based, for various conditions. But I was in country X, and I have sinusitis. I submitted my claim and I was denied. And I'm willing to bet my life if you send me that decision letter, it's going to say you weren't diagnosed. And what veterans do often, and I never recommend this, is they have documented symptoms, but then they rely on the C&P examiner to give the diagnosis, which is totally possible. That can happen, but that assumes that your documented symptoms would lead the examiner to give the diagnosis in the first place. A C&P exam is a one-time visit. And from a medical professional perspective, and I'm not a medical professional, by the way, but they are reluctant to give a diagnosis based on a one-time visit. So you really want to go to your primary healthcare team, whether that's through the VA or through private insurance, whatever that looks like for you, to get that current diagnosis. And that's really what I want to push with presumptives is, one, the presumptive basis has zero input into your rating. So if you are 0%, look at 38 CFR criteria, and then submit that evidence-based increased claim. And then again, you need a current diagnosis. It's got to be chronic, right? So having a runny nose isn't rhinitis, right? That's just a runny nose. And now having built up polyps and you get a CT scan and you're on medication for sinusitis, that is chronic. Runny nose is runny nose. Sinusitis, rhinitis, bronchitis, asthma, all of that stuff are chronic conditions. And that's probably the question I'm asked most about presumptives, are those two things. So keep that in mind. And I guess the last thing I will add are presumptives are amazing. It is, in my opinion, the best thing the VA and any administration has ever done was pass presumptive conditions. We look at the Vietnam era. No one gets shafted more than the Vietnam era. Okay, the PACT Act was backdated to August of 22 for Vietnam era related conditions. Imagine going 30, 40 years being stepped on and then finally getting passed, where my generation, post 9/11, it happened in 22. So we didn't have to deal with that. So it's definitely too little too late for Vietnam era. But at least we're heading in the right direction. Other than that, I guess let's go ahead and jump into which presumptives we're talking about, and we will clarify if they are location based, time based, and then we'll have all of these links in the description of this video because there's like 50 different links that you'll have to find that pertain to you. So I'll kick it back to you, Jason.
All right. So this first one we're going to talk about is actually probably the most irritating one for me. And it is the 1 year presumptives. And what I mean by 1 year is 1 year from your discharge. Yes, there is a list of presumptive conditions for you that the VA just concedes and presumes that if you have this condition, then it happened from your military service. Now, there is, again, a list. However, my opinion is, look, the answer is always no if you don't ask. If you got diagnosed for anything other than an injury, right? You can't go get in a car accident, have your leg jacked up after you got out and file for your bad leg from your car accident. But diseases, right? Heartburn, headaches, a back issue, maybe a back issue if it ties back to your time. But really, I'm talking about like the diseases. So the things like high blood pressure, those types of things. File for it if you got diagnosed within 1 year, because the VA may look at that as a presumptive condition. And again, they outline it on their website that there is this 1 year presumptive. They do have a list of all the presumptive conditions, and they also give even I guess an example, right? So it says here, evidence that your condition is at least 10% disabling, like a doctor's report that shows that you take medicine for your high blood pressure, right? And also it says that you need to provide evidence that your condition appeared within 1 year after your discharge from active service. So again, this is the 1 year presumptive. And the sad part about it, Clay, that really bothers me is that I don't know anybody, except for people that I talked to myself, but other than me talking to them, and probably you, because you've also spoke at TAPS, right? So I would go speak at TAPS, right? But it's just geographical, right? We're one little TAPS class out of the entire nation, right? So there are a few of us out there doing this and getting this information out there, but this needs to be a standard. This type of information needs to be given to those getting out. Hey, look, I get it. You haven't went to medical or sick call or the battalion aid station or whatever it's called, right? You haven't went there because you didn't want to be reprimanded in some sort of weird way or looked down on or called or whatever. So you just didn't. But now you're going to get out. You can go to the doctor and get diagnosed for these things, and it's going to be the same as if you were still in. But nobody told anybody that. So what do? We get out. We're focused on life. We're focused on, hey, I got a wife, I got kids, or I got a husband and I got kids, or whatever the situation is. And you're out there trying to hustle and make ends meet and find a job and balance. And maybe I'm going to try to go to school too. That year flies by, Clay. And it's not until years later that people go, well, damn, I wish I would have known, because then I would have X, Y, and Z. So tell me a little bit about that 1 year presumptive from your perspective, Clay. I'd like to really kind of hammer this thing home. Hopefully there's people watching that are still in or within that 1 year, right? That's hopefully when people start Google searching and figuring out what they should do. So I hope they land on this and hear it.
Absolutely. So whenever I was, and I'll kind of give my TAPS plus brief on the 1 year presumptive. Whenever I was teaching TAPS, here's what I would tell veterans is, or soon to be veterans. One, if you spend your time understanding VA policy and understanding 38 CFR and M21 TAC 1, that's going to take a lot of time. And you don't have to understand any of those to submit an evidence-based claim. So I started with that to say, hey, there's a lot of stuff you don't know, but let me tell you what you need to know. And technically speaking, there's not a ton of conditions that are presumed to be service connected within 1 year, right? The two linchpins are definitely hearing loss and tinnitus. Those are presumptive within 1 year. But then you have back pain. That's not presumptive if diagnosed. But let's just think about this logically, right? Technically, it's not presumptive. Okay, got it. That means it's going to require a medical opinion to be connected, your back connected to service. But if you've only been out for 8 months, tell me logically, how is an examiner going to say that condition happened within the last 8 months versus the last 10 years that you were in the Marine Corps or the Air Force or whatever? So you can see how it's difficult for the examiner to say that, especially if your evidence indicates damage over a period of time, right? Like cartilage deteriorating or arthritis, conditions like that. And so those types of conditions are extremely, although not presumptive, technically, Extremely easy to connect. I'll tell you a story about me. I had zero evidence of back pain at all. Absolutely zero. I was in the inventory, and then I did some psyop stuff on the soft side of the house. So it was physically demanding, right? At my 9-month-ish mark, I filed for my back. Boom, service connected. Probably one of the easiest claims I ever submitted. And I had zero medical evidence, right? I had evidence other than medical, but really the key was, hey, this back condition didn't stem from the last 9 months. It had to be from service. And so the reason why I say that is because what I tell service members at TAPS is, listen, within that 1 year, whether it's presumptive or not, it's irrelevant, right? If you have a condition, submit it. Once that 1 year time frame passes, welcome to the club. You're with everyone else, and that is the uphill battle that we see veterans fighting now. But if you're in that 1 year, you're still downhill. Life is good as far as your ability to be compensated by the VA. Life is going good, and the second you hit that 1 year mark is whenever you start climbing that hill. So my big key takeaway to just wrap up 1 year presumptives is, if you have a condition that is chronic, submit the claim. Let the VA do VA stuff, okay? They're going to. You can't control that. You submit the claim within that 1 year. It is absolutely critical to submit that claim within that 1 year time frame. Now, I know I doubled down on that. I also want to say, if you've already passed that 1 year, like the majority of veterans, it's not impossible, right? So there's still presumptives that cover a longer 1 year window, and that's really what we're going to get into. But that's what I tell service members at TAPS about the 1 year window, just to let them know, saying, hey, submit the claim. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, yeah. And Clay, there's probably, and I didn't count them all, but there's probably about 35 or 40 conditions listed on the 3.309 alpha of the Code of Federal Regulations 38, right? So the 38 CFR. So that's what they reference here for that 1 year presumptive period. And again, and I'm on the same boat as you. I just said it differently. As far as file your claim for whatever you have within that 1 year period, because the VA may throw it under a presumptive, which is outstanding. And like you said, the sooner you do it, the sooner you file a claim after service, the less time there is between your service and your claim, which means there's less time for you to have something else happen to create doubt, right? So it's almost like it's positive evidence if you're filing it within 1 year, right? Just that alone. And that might help you at the Board of Appeals. I look at it as the judges kind of, they're looking for, does the story make sense, right? Now, if all of a sudden if you had, I don't know, you were a paralegal in the Air Force, and then you got out, and then you became a construction worker, and then a year goes by and you file your claim for your bad back, they might not believe you, because it's like, okay, well, that didn't happen from your service, that happened from carrying sheets of plywood up a janky ladder to the roof, right? So it has to all kind of make sense as far as making it an easier road anyway. So back to the idea of presumptives. This presumptive is a special presumptive list, 1 year period, because unlike most other presumptives, they require wartime. You had to have been in theater, okay? Vietnam, Korea, Gulf War, right? This does not. You could have been stationed in Hawaii the whole time and nobody cares, right? This is just simply, you wrote the blank check, you got all the shots and vaccines and everything else that they wanted to give you. There's some things that are going to happen to you. Believe me, this is why this stuff is here. These weird diseases, right, are because you're a petri dish. So without going down that rabbit hole, I did want to bring up, in addition to that, because there's one other presumptive, well, there's 4 other presumptive conditions, Clay, and I know you know them, that don't require war experience, right? There's no theater, there's no combat requirement as far as being, in an actual theater of combat, right? So those are Hansen's disease, tuberculosis, multiple sclerosis, and ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, right? These, and this is really interesting, right? And this is also one of those weird eye openers for people. So you're telling me that because I served in the military, regardless of where and when, and what my experience was, stationed in Hawaii the whole time, if I come down with Hansen's disease within 3 years, the VA is going to honor that and give me service connection. You got to think about this in the sense of the VA is conceding to whatever you may have experienced in your military, regardless of where you went. You have a greater chance than the civilian sector of developing Hansen's disease, is essentially what they're saying, just because of your time in the military. Tuberculosis, 3 years, if it shows up within 3 years. MS, if it shows up within 7 years of discharge. And this last one, Clay, is really important for folks. If you know anybody in your family that served in the military who has ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, it's an indefinite time frame. They could get ALS at any age, any duration of time after their service, and be service connected at 100% from the VA. That's a huge deal, and anybody who has ALS that served in the military needs to know that this is an option for them. So Clay, real quick, any thoughts on these 4? I mean, I kind of gave the information, but I'd love to get your quick thoughts on it. I mean, there's not much else to say, but I would love your thoughts, and then we can transition.
Yeah, I'll kind of expand it, right? I'll tell you this: if I develop cancer, I don't even have to look at a list, and I will submit the claim, right? And it kind of goes back to what you said, that just based on those 4, the VA has enough data, right? They don't just kind of make this up. There's data that support the presumptives. That's what gets passed. There's enough data to say that military members, no matter where, are prone to develop these 4 conditions more so than anyone else. Now that those cancers, I'll just kind of lump them in one ball, right? Diseases and cancers, that's just 4. The more deployments you do, the more presumptives that grow. And so if you have deployments and basically what I'm trying to say is if I have cancer, I don't even care if it's on a list. I don't even have to do research. I'm going to submit the claim just based on that statement, right? And that's really what I want to push is if you're a veteran with cancer, do you have to know the ins and outs of the law that made that pass and the data that went into that made that pass? Absolutely not. If you have cancer, I would absolutely submit the claim. Let the VA do VA stuff. You don't have to tell them you were in Vietnam or you were in Korea. They're going to know, right? We have personnel records and DD-214s that show that. And I would just submit the claim, to be honest, just to make it Barney style easy. If you have cancer, especially ALS, right? Anything that's like very, very severe, submit the claim, right? There's really no harm to it whatsoever. And I'll kind of just blanket it at that. And that list does expand as we go further into this.
Right. Yeah. And I'll throw in one last kind of thought there. Even if your cancer is not on a presumptive list and you file for it, you may get denied, which it's not fine, but this is the world we're in. But 2 things happen. One, it gives the VA an additional thing to look at. Oh, this person filed for that cancer. Well, you're not probably the only one. So if 1,000 people do that, or 10,000 or 100,000 people file for that cancer from the same location, all of a sudden the wheels start to turn and they go, hey, there's been a spike in this cancer for people in this area. Maybe we should make that a presumptive condition. Let's look into it, study it, whatever. So there's that piece. The other piece is that if they deny you, now you're going to take a step back, go work on your Nexus letter. Hey, look, doc, I was exposed to this, that, is that, and you just got to kind of work the standard claim process and try to prove the Nexus in that way, which isn't the end of the world. I mean, you might be able to find something else. For example, a quick one, a buddy of mine, older gentleman, served during the Vietnam War, but not in Vietnam, right? So he was up in Alaska somewhere on a ship. So he was on the ship, and I don't remember how long he did. Not super long. He was in 4 or 5 years or whatever it was. Got out, and then when he's in his 70s, he develops lung cancer. Okay, there's no presumptives for him. He served in Alaska on a ship, right? And he didn't get this condition until 50 years later or whatever it is. So so he filed and got denied, right? Of course. So then we do research, and we find, ship registries and all this stuff, and different, blah, blah, blahs and all this stuff, and tracked where he was at. And sure enough, found his ship, and that it was just riddled with asbestos, like everything back then. But that's evidence, right? So he's sitting there, scratching the walls, bored, breathing in the asbestos. Then the ship was worked on in a shipyard that was also like practically condemned because it was just so riddled with asbestos. So that was evidence in his favor, and then he was able to win the claim, and so on and so forth. So that's what happens if you file and it doesn't get approved via presumptive. Those two things. VA gets some more information. Maybe it'll turn into a presumptive for other folks. You're paving the way, being that kind of pathfinder for folks. And then the second side is that you're not out. You just need to give a little more evidence. So what do you have, Clay?
Absolutely. So the Navy deals with asbestos more than anyone, just from my experience of talking with veterans. And we'll have this link down below as well. But it's exactly what you said, and I wanted to read it straight from the VA. And it talks about what documents you need to submit that claim to prove your asbestos caused that condition. And then the VA also says, hey, if you worked in these areas, you should probably go get checked. So the VA is
Right.
telling you what to do. And so I
Right.
just wanted to go over that as, really, really quickly. I didn't
Yeah.
mean to interrupt there, but
No, it's good.
there's 3 things. It says medical records that state your health condition. So you need a current diagnosis, right? Service records that list your job or specialty. It could be also location, right? I was on this ship. And then the last thing is the nexus, a doctor's statement that there's a connection between your contact with asbestos and that health condition. And so it's the VA telling you, hey, you need the big 3. You're like, got it. That we know. We can do that. Okay. And then it says, I'll just read the question. How do I know if I have a health condition caused by my contact with asbestos? And the VA says, get tested if you've worked in these areas, which are mining, milling, shipyards, construction, carpentry, and demolition. So tons of Navy work in the shipyard, obviously, right?
Right.
You have engineers in construction. You have
CBs.
a lot, yes. CBs, you have civil affairs, right? They're often engineers. You have infantry bubbas and bubbettes working with demolition, right? I mean, everything's under the sun here. And then it also says, the VA says, get tested if you've made or worked with products like flooring, roofing, cement, pipes, insulation, and then brake linings. And so if you fall in that category, the VA says, hey, get tested, get the evidence, and we'll go ahead and submit that claim for asbestos. And that's just one example of the exposure, right? Which technically isn't presumptive. And so, real quick, and then I'll kick it back to you. I don't want to go too deep into this because it's extremely confusing, but something called TERA, TERA, which is toxic exposure risk activity. TERA is not presumptive, although people think it is, but it's not, because TERA requires an opinion, like asbestos, right? Asbestos says a doctor's statement that there's a connection between your contact with asbestos and your health condition. So it requires an opinion. So technically it's not presumptive, but the VA is saying, hey, your exposure could be the in-service event for
Right.
that condition.
Right.
That's
You bring
basically
up
TERA. Go ahead.
You bring up a great point, Clay, because that what you're talking about for folks to really grasp this is if you understand how good presumptives are and how difficult it can be to do just a standard claim sometimes, just trying to figure it out. This is that sweet spot in the middle that it's like they're giving me all the tools I need to create the nexus, right? And I think that this is almost, it's a hybrid. It's almost a presumptive, right? So that is a very, I'm glad that you brought it up in that way because it is a very, very important piece. And it's that almost presumptive. You still need to prove it and get the doctor's opinion and all that stuff, but it's much easier than saying, my GERD started when I was in and I have no documentation. Okay, well, now that's a pretty uphill battle. So these types of things with the exposure risks are outstanding. So it's good that they acknowledge it and utilize it. It's kind of like, and tinnitus most likely. Well, we did a video on it. Will most likely go away, but then there'll still be that if there's hearing loss and tinnitus, then whatever. But the whole MOS noise exposure list contributing to hearing loss and tinnitus. It doesn't make it a presumptive, but it makes it a lot easier to get the yes because there's already some acknowledgments that it would be highly likely if you had certain MOSs. So with that, Clay, let's jump over if you're ready to move on to. Let's start with Korea for. Any sort of presumptive conditions. And for the most part, and you and I talked about this before, for the most part, Korea, specifically the DMZ, is really kind of mirroring a lot of this stuff from the Vietnam era presumptive lists. And there is a list here on the VA's website, and there's a little blurb here that I want to read out as well, just to for the sake of just getting it from the horse's mouth, right? So Korean DMZ and Agent Orange exposure, veterans who served in a unit or near. I love that because what's or near, right?
Yeah.
How near? How near are we talking? Because, anywhere in Korea is pretty near compared to something else, right? So anyway, so served in a unit or near the Korean DMZ anytime between September 1, 1967 and August 31st, 1971 are presumed to have been exposed to herbicides. So this is during the Vietnam era, right? And they're saying that if you were in that area, then they're looking at the herbicide exposure. These veterans do not show these veterans do not have to show that they were exposed to Agent Orange to be eligible for disability compensation. So that goes back to the fact that it is presumptive. So the big things that kind of happened over the last 5 years or so is the whole idea that you had to be, that Agent Orange stopped at the borders, right? It's no, the wind blows, right? And so then that's where we were able to get some real big expansions. And another great one was the Blue Water Navy addition, to the 12 nautical miles. You no longer had to have boots on ground, which is also awesome. What are your thoughts, Clay, on that? I'm going to pull up something else here while you go ahead and give us your thoughts.
Absolutely. So Agent Orange is the, I like to call it the clinch pin of the Korean and Vietnam era veterans when it comes to exposure. Now, there are 6 different time frames and locations for Agent Orange. I'll just go ahead and read those verbatim. But this is a pretty long list, and the conditions, which I'm not going to read verbatim, but there's about, just looking at this, there's about 20, maybe 25 conditions that are presumptive based on Agent Orange, period. And so if you meet this time and location criteria and you have a condition that's linked to Agent Orange, simply submit the claim. Okay. So Republic of Vietnam or on a vessel of not more than 12 nautical miles, yada, yada, yada. We talked about that. of Vietnam and Cambodia from January of 62 to May of 75. So 62 to 75. Then you have Royal U.S. or Royal Thai military base in Thailand, right, from January to June of 76. You have Laos from 65 to 69, and the list just goes on, right? Cambodia, tons of other provinces from 69 to from April to basically the month of April of 1969. Guam or American Samoa. So Guam, you don't even have to be in a foreign country. Technically, Guam's a territory. I got it, right? January of 62 to July of 1980. And then Johnston Atoll or on a ship called Johnston from January of 72 to 1977. Now, I don't expect you to, jot that down real quick as I'm saying it. We're going to have these links down below. But pretty much the point I wanted to really drive is, listen, the list for Agent Orange is pretty big. And there's actually a piece of legislation, and I think, you know more about this than I do, Jason, that would expand exposure to when Agent Orange was stored in the States or on a ship, right?
Huge.
So I'm not gonna say it's going to, because it's not passed, but it's likely to expand. But as of right now, there are tons of expansions already for Agent Orange and about 25 conditions stemming from Agent Orange. So if that's you, absolutely take the time to look into it. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of just give this little breakdown too for Korean vets, Korea War vets, and there's some of this stuff is like no brainer, right? And again, this is one of those situations to where it's sadly there may be some of this. Wow, this would have been nice to know many years ago, right? So it says here, if you served during the Korean War anytime between June 25, 1950 and July 27th, 1953, you may be at risk of certain health conditions. And then it goes on. And this is kind of along the same lines that you talked about, Clay, with this is almost that hybrid version. It's not quite a presumptive, but the VA is really conceding to a lot of issues here. So you might just need to get the medical opinion and you're pretty much going to be good. So it says, you may be at risk of illness or injuries caused by, and they have 3 bullet points here: extreme cold, health problems like skin cancer and frostbite scars, or pain, tingling, or numbness in the fingers or toes caused by the effects of cold climates. You're at higher risk if you served in the chosen reservoir campaign conducted from October through December 1950 in extreme sub-zero temperatures. Okay, so they're basically saying that if you have any of these kind of extreme cold conditions and you served in Korea, you're probably going to get approved. And if you were chosen what reservoir, well, then it's probably like a super extra, you're going to get approved, right? The next one is occupational job related hazards, right? Because it's just the time and place, right? So chemicals, paints, radiation, and other hazards you may have come in contact with through your job in the military there, right? And then noise, obviously, it wasn't a quiet time. Harmful sounds, from guns, explosive rockets, heavy weapons, jets, and aircraft and machinery that can cause or contribute to hearing loss and tinnitus. So the VA is saying essentially, hey, look, if you have any of these things, you should probably file for a claim. The VA, do not do this for everybody. They don't have a special little spot that says, hey, look, here are some of the key things that you need to be aware of and you should probably file for. So I did want to point that out for our Korean vets, specifically the cold weather stuff is just horrific. I visited a Korean war vet that was, he was housebound, amputations, the whole 9 yards. I mean, from cold weather stuff, and it was a nightmare for that poor guy and his wife. And they weren't connected for anything, and we were racing the clock because he was going to go at any time and trying to get set up for any sort of benefits and DIC for after the fact, and it's rough. So for any Korean War vets out there, this is some important stuff, as well as surviving spouses need to also be aware. So with that, we can go ahead and bounce, unless you have anything you want to add to that, Clay.
No, not at all. Just to be narcissistic a little bit, I was in Korea for 2 months. Not in the 50s, obviously. But
Right,
from December to February, and we had cold weather gear and ear pro, and we had all the gear, and it was still cold. And so
right.
we called ourselves the Frozen Chosen as a joke. I couldn't imagine being
Oh,
stuck there for
oh,
way longer than 2 months
right,
without cold weather gear. That sucks. So,
right.
this
Yeah,
is the PACT Act for those are definitely too little too late.
yeah,
But it's here
absolutely.
now, so for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on that kind of note, I was never in Korea. My oldest son is or was in Korea, back, I don't know, maybe a year ago or so. He joined the Air Force and he went to a base there. I was in Japan, and during my time in Japan, I went to the northern island called Hokkaido, and we did some cross training there with the Japanese Self Defense Force, and it was in December, January, and oh my god, it was. We had those Mickey Mouse boots, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh,
we
yeah.
were humping around out there, and we spent like 3 days, just not even really sleeping because it was just too cold to even try to take a nap, and going through this whole exercise, and as we were humping around, our feet would sweat. You know how you have little valves on
Mhm.
the side so you can let some air in? So, like, nobody really told, it's like, here's some boots. You know what I mean? Put those on, they'll keep your feet warm. So nobody really told you like to do anything with the vents. It was just throw on these stupid boots and go. So then your feet were sweating, and then you would stop, and then the sweat would turn to ice because it was so cold. It was a night. It was so bad. Oh man. Okay. Anyway, good times, right? We had
Yeah.
one guy go down, hypothermia, had to strip him down, throw him in a sleeping bag with another guy. It's,
Nice.
yeah, good times. Yeah.
Nice.
Ah, all right. So as we move on, as we digress and go down rabbit holes, um, so back to the Vietnam list, right? Is substantial. Um, there's a lot of um, conditions and
Mhm.
new conditions that got added. Some from probably 3 years ago or so got added in, and then we got a couple more here with the PACT Act for Vietnam and those that served in Korea near the DMZ during that specified time frame. One of my favorite ones for Vietnam folks now, and I'm so glad they added it, was hypertension,
Yeah.
because I had so many folks complain about the fact that it wasn't there. They had hypertension, they were filing claims, they were getting denied, and now it's there. Hypertension is a really, really important one because just the rate of heart attacks for folks, and that being a cause of death, is important to be service connected, or at least have the awareness for your spouse to know that, hey, if anything happens to me, go see the accredited rep, let them know that I passed, and just remember DIC, right? Dependency indemnity compensation, and hopefully they can walk you through it. I'm going to add one little piece here, and then I want to get your thoughts on some of the presumptive conditions on the Vietnam side. My I don't know, we'll call it a tangent, is on the after effects, right? So all this DIC stuff, the dependency indemnity compensation, right? Yeah, it's great to get benefits while we're alive, obviously, right? That's the number one goal, is to be able to have the benefits that we earned. But the after the fact piece is, we think to ourselves, man, veterans just don't know what's available. Nobody's telling us stuff. Well, guess what? Nobody's telling the spouses either, right? Even
Yeah.
less spouses are aware. So your spouse, your dependent children, your parents, in some cases, can qualify for DIC, dependency indemnity compensation. The biggest point here that I want to make for this is your condition, if you are less than 10 years at 100% or TDIU. If you're 100% for 10 years, or you have TDIU for 10 years, then you're basically solid for DIC. It'll be guaranteed if you pass away. But anything before that 10-year period, you need to have your cause of death be because of a service-connected condition. Now, here's the tricky part. Sometimes the service-connected condition isn't listed as the cause of death on the death certificate. The example I like to use is veteran died of a heart attack. Bam. Heart attack is the cause of death. Maybe that veteran didn't have a heart condition, but they had a circulatory issue in their leg that they were service connected for, or they were service connected for hypertension, a presumptive condition for Vietnam folks. That can be listed on the death certificate as a contributing cause to death. The VA views them the same. So if your death certificate, if you're the surviving spouse and the death certificate just has one condition for cause of death, and you need to get that second one added in there as a contributing cause, so that way you have a service-connected condition on the death certificate, you can have it amended and redone, right? You just need to contact your vital records folks and let them know that you need a correction to the death certificate, and work with them on that process. My rooster. So anyway, back to you, Clay.
Oh yeah. So
Vietnam.
there's three, generally speaking, just from speaking with Vietnam veterans, there's three conditions that stand out presumptive to Agent Orange. First one's always going to be hypertension, and the only thing I'll add to that, which I love that example that you give, is that also includes 0% hypertension, right? As long as hypertension is service connected, even at 0, because the most common rating for that is 0%. That's a whole other video and a it gets under my skin a little bit, but whatever, right? Even if it's connected at 0%, it still can be a contributing factor to a heart condition, or a heart attack, or whatever the cause is, right? The other two that are that I see a lot is type 2 diabetes. Obviously, those with hypertension are really going to fall into that. And then prostate cancer. I don't know the data on prostate cancer, but I know a ton of Vietnam veterans with prostate cancer, and that is also presumptive under Agent Orange. There's about 25-ish conditions that are presumptive under Agent Orange. And so if you had exposure to that, right now it's for your Korean Vietnam veterans, right? And then if the piece of legislation is passed of exposure where it was stored stateside or on ship or wherever, once that is passed, the assumption that it is passed, absolutely look at this list, and we'll have all these links down below. But yeah, that's really all I wanted to add to the Vietnam era, is just those top three. That's it. Yeah, go. Please.
Yeah, I'll throw in a couple more. So ischemic heart disease, I've seen a lot, and also Parkinson's. Parkinson's disease is another one that I had seen. So I do agree with you absolutely on the diabetes. I mean, that's a huge one.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, is that sometimes in life we think to ourselves, well, my 7 people in my family have diabetes. I was probably going to get it anyway, right? Just move on with life. No, it's a presumptive condition. They don't care if your whole family has diabetes and you ate Twinkies your whole life. They don't care. They just care that you were in Vietnam or you were in an area that was exposed to Agent Orange, to given the time frames, blah, blah, blah. If you served there and you have diabetes, that's it, type 2. That's it. So make sure that you file for that. I mean, it really is a big, big deal. And I'll tell you that sometimes our own pride gets in the way, right? This is not a handout. This is not, you're not working the system. You're not taking advantage of something. You're not taking it away from somebody else who needs it, right? No, this is a benefit that you earned by your time in service, right? And you need to make sure you don't leave it on the table, right? And I will tell you this, you're not taking it away from somebody else. What you're doing is you're ensuring that it continues for those that follow. Mm-hmm. That's really the way you need to look at it. So with that, Clay, let's jump over to some Gulf War stuff for you.
All right. So
I'll let you kick that one off. I know
Gulf,
it's near and dear. Let's go.
Yeah, so there's a first, I think Gulf War, we should really draw a line between Gulf War and
And
post
post
9/11.
9/11?
There's gonna be
Yeah, good
tons
call.
of,
Yeah,
overlap, okay? There's always tons of overlap, but
right. Were you even
there's
born in,
definitely
were you
specifics.
even born during the first one?
I was born in 1992.
Okay, so it was pretty much done. It just got over.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Black Hawk Down is my,
There
whenever
you
I was
go.
born, okay?
There you go.
So yeah, so we have, Gulf War era and post 9/11 era. I'll start with the most difficult ones to understand for Gulf War, which are something called MUCMIs, and undiagnosed illnesses. And it's extremely confusing. And I'm just going to break it down Barney style on how I, receive information. And so there are three MUCMIs. MUCMI stands for medically unexplained chronic multi-symptom illness.
It's a
MUCMI,
mouthful.
right? So that is, if I was to translate that into Americanese, right? It would be, hey, we don't know where this came from, but enough veterans from this era have it that it's now presumptive, right? That's basically what an MUCMI means. So there's three of them. There's chronic fatigue syndrome, so CFS, and often that's called Gulf War syndrome, Gulf War illness. It's all the same, right? You're tired, you're fatigued, something's happening. That's chronic fatigue syndrome. You have fibromyalgia, and then you
Mm,
have irritable bowel syndrome. Yes, IBS can be presumptive. It can be under the medically unexplained, the MUCMI, right? And to diagnose chronic fatigue syndrome, I'll start with that one first. Um, the only way to get a diagnosis of an undiagnosed illness, and I'll explain that in a second, is to rule everything out, right? So, hey, your fatigue syndrome isn't from sleep disturbances. It's not
mm,
from chronic pain. It's not from that. It's not from this. It's not from that. Therefore, we don't know what it's from. That's what makes it an undiagnosed illness. You still technically have a diagnosis, but a diagnosis has a cause. Okay, that's
right.
why it's an undiagnosed illness. So the VA is basically saying, "Hey, something's happening. We just don't know where it came from." Boom, CFS, fibro, those fall into that category. Now, IBS isn't that complicated. You can get a colonoscopy, get scraped, do all that, 40-year-old man stuff. I'm not there yet. That's a old. I had to give it back to you. You have to get checked for colon cancer and all that stuff. And if you have IBS and there's no cause, then it's presumptive under the MUCMI. Now, there's undiagnosed illnesses, and to have an undiagnosed illness, you have to have symptoms of the undiagnosed illness. Okay. So I'm just going to read a few of them, right? So fatigue, skin, and headaches. There are many, many more, but those three can also be presumptive under the undiagnosed illness. So, yes, migraines can be presumptive for Gulf War, and that's an overlap. It also involves Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then Southwest Asia. And I'll explain what Southwest Asia means here in a second, right? So, one of my good friends has migraines connected as a presumptive, right? And I'll tell you it's very rare because usually that has a cause. But if there's no cause, it can be a symptom of an undiagnosed illness. That's what MUCMI is, right? Now, do you have to understand that to submit these claims and be presumptive? No, you don't. All you do is, hey, I got a current diagnosis. Let's submit the claim. Let the VA do VA stuff. The VA is going to do MUCMIs. They're going to do um, undiagnosed illness. You don't have to tell the VA, hey, this is a PACT Act claim. You don't have to do that. The VA is going to look at your records and look at your evidence and make that determination. In fact, you can't tell the VA to pack that claim because they don't, okay, I don't care. I'm going to look at your evidence, right? The only thing I'll add to that, and I'll shoot it back over because MUCMIs are probably the most ambiguous thing about these presumptives for Gulf War. Let's talk about Southwest Asia Theater of Operations. And so to fall into the Gulf War era for those MUCMIs, there's a list. It says Southwest Asia AO. Okay, I'll tell you what that is. And then there's additional countries on top of that, and that's the post 9/11 overlap, right? So you have Afghan, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Syria, or Jordan. So in addition to Southwest Asia, Afghan, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Syria, or Jordan. Well, now let's look at what is Southwest Asia. Why does the VA do this instead of just list them out? I don't know. Okay. It's just what they do. So let's talk about what Southwest Asia is, right? You have Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi. There's a neutral zone between Iraq and Saudi that also counts. Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, and oh, by the way, for our Navy seamen out there and women, that's a Navy joke. You have the Gulf of Aden, the Gulf
I
of
think it's I think
Oman,
it's I think it's sailors there.
sailors. Oh, okay, okay, all right, yeah. So the Gulf of Aden, the Gulf of Oman, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea. Oh, and by the way, the airspace of all, basically the entire Middle East. Okay, that is Southwest Asia and Gulf War presumptive list for MUCMIs. Now that the hard stuff is out of the way, and trust me, we are absolutely going to put that link there so you can see all of that. Now that all that's out of the way, I'll kick it back to you, Jason, on just your thoughts on Gulf
Yeah,
War era
yeah.
presumptives.
So this is a whole different time, right? So the Vietnam folks had to wait decades for this
Mhm.
type of stuff to come into effect. Now, I get it. For some of us, you still had to wait a decade or even two in some cases, right? But this is much faster than it was for the Vietnam folks. There's a list, right? There's a decent list of cancers, and there's a decent list of other conditions, right? Most commonly, you're going to hear the things like the rhinitis and sinusitis, that type of stuff. And then there's a whole host of different types of cancers, mostly from like the collarbone up type of cancers. But here's the big thing. This is the takeaway that I really want everybody to understand. You may not have these conditions today, but guess what? You're getting a snapshot of what your future might have, and it's scary.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, right? Get checked. Like, I don't care how old you are. Go get checked. Like, hey, look, I need to make sure that I'm like good to go, right? Here's a list. If you're going to a private doctor or even your VA doctor, doesn't really matter. Hey, here's a list of the presumptives for the things that I've been exposed to. Can we like make sure that I'm like not in any of those boats? Because as we all know, treating any sort of major issue is much better if you catch it up front early, right? Catch it up front early. You can help to get it into remission and what have you. So my thing is, one, get checked, make sure that that you don't have anything major going on. You have a great snapshot here of some horrible issues that could arise, and you just want to be ahead of it. The second piece is mostly, look, the VA is such a weird world, right? It's like everything horrible is good and everything good is horrible, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'm at 100% because I got all these horrible things, or hey, I don't have anything really that bad. I'm only at 10%. It sucks, right? So it's this weird world. And I guess that if you had to pick which bucket to be in, you would much rather probably have the illnesses versus the cancers. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So read through all of these things on anything, any presumptive conditions, criteria that you meet as far as the times, dates, locations, what have you. Read the list of presumptives and just be aware of them. Be aware that they exist out there. And if you start to develop any signs or symptoms, go get checked for it, get diagnosed. The diagnosis is it's the major piece of your claim. You know that you serve somewhere, and if the VA had to find it for you, they could. It's better if you just provide it yourself. But that diagnosis piece is really, really important. I would say that the biggest ones that it's the sinusitis, rhinitis, bronchitis, COPD are kind of like that's probably the big four of just like the tidal wave of people coming in filing claims. So there's a lot of just respiratory issues going on, and obviously associated with burn pits and all that stuff, and just the the literal shit in the air, right? So I didn't know that was going to be funny until I said it. So anyway, back to you, Clay. I'd love to hear. I mean, you fit into this bucket of presumptives, and you can share some great insights for folks. And maybe if you see any hesitations, I mean, look, there's two sets of people, Clay. There's the people that are watching our videos, and they're Johnny and Janie on the spot. They're trying to figure it out. They're pushing through claims. They're doing stuff. What about that other set of people? You know them like I know them, that are like, it doesn't really bother me that bad, or I don't know, whatever. Have a conversation with us, Clay.
Oh yeah. So focusing on the veterans that this doesn't bother me that much. Okay. So that sinusitis, that is a runny nose, right? And you're like, I'm not going to submit for that. Whatever. All right. Got it. There's a pride there. There's tons of reasons. I understand that. Okay. I'm not oblivious to why you don't want to, but just think about this. Fast forward in the future, about 20 years from right now, that runny nose turns into really, really heavy clogged polyps. You now require surgery, right?
Oh,
Surgery doesn't heal the problem. You're on constant antibiotics. Oh, by the way, the number one symptom for severe sinusitis is migraines. I don't know if anyone ever experienced a migraine that is pulsating. You could almost feel your brain kind of be constricted. It's painful, and it's a pain that it doesn't go away. Okay. And that will develop from sinusitis. It's not if, it's going to develop, especially as you get older in age. And the good news is, when you're at that time frame, because sinusitis is presumptive, assuming you meet the criteria, you could submit the claim then and be service connected, right? But then you'd be losing out on 20 years of not just compensation, all right, but of healthcare benefits. Maybe you want to go to VRE, right? Maybe that would open the door to 100% PNT, which has P&T, if you were to add the dollar figure of P&T together, from compensation, from property taxes, from discounts here and there, going to Disney, just whatever, it probably, I would make an argument, it's about six figures a year, probably, right?
oh well,
If
because
you
you also
add,
have to just and include in, just free medical care. And
yep,
let's say that you now don't have medical coverage for your family, so you have them on Champ VA, right?
hmm
So now your whole family's covered. Yeah. Oh, easy. Oh, easy,
tons of
easy,
benefits.
easy. 150,000.
Yeah. I do like how you segued that and kicked it back, because you said, like, I fall into this boat. And something I want to tell veterans is, I did not know this, what I'm about to tell you, until I started doing the research. Because doubling back on our 1 year presumptive list, there are secret 1 year presumptives. I'm saying secret with quotes, because technically it's public, but the VA is not telling you, hey, here's a 1 year presumptive list. There's a 1 year presumptive list for Afghanistan. Who would have thought, right? I didn't know that. Um, that 1 year presumptive list, I can't even pronounce half of these. I can pronounce two of them. So those are the ones I'm going to read, and we'll have the link down below, right? But West Nile virus and malaria. Obviously, those are very severe. There's a ton more above that. But no one's talking about this. And the reason I want to drive that home is because whatever your experience is, the viewer, figure out where you deployed to and do some research. Hey, I was in Somalia in 1993, right? During Black Hawk Down, whatever, right? Or Somalia in 2018. People were dying in Somalia since the 90s. Okay. So war hasn't stopped there, especially after the global war on terrorism. So if you were in Somalia or Mali or whatever country, do the research, because no one's going to tell you what that is. And there's tons of other presumptives that expand that 1 year, kind of like ALS, how it's lifetime. There are other lifetime conditions for Afghan, Djibouti, Syria, Uzbekistan, the Persian Gulf War. So Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, basically pretty much the
Oh,
central Middle
yeah,
East, right?
yeah.
Um, Tons. I can't pronounce these either, but it's tons of lung conditions. Okay, tons of lung conditions. I had a coworker who retired, Actually, this is a perfect example. I'm not going to say his name because I don't have his permission to say his name, but he is a old school type, right? Really, really for God and country type of dude, right? Did his service, did his reserves, then became a federal employee, and then worked till he was 62 and retired with like 45 years of federal service, right? So really, just your blue collar type of federal employee, right? But he refused to submit for compensation. And he was in Bosnia in the 80s. He was in the Gulf War. He was, I believe, in Panama in like 90s, whenever Panama happened. He was in Iraq multiple times, and he
Oh,
still
oh,
refuses to submit
oh,
his claims. I'm actually gonna text him today, and I'm gonna shoot him this video once it posts this clip. But I know he has a lung condition, and he wheezes, so there's going to be a COPD asthma aspect to that. But there are other lung conditions like large cell carcinoma of the lung. I don't even know what that is, to be honest with you.
right.
But there are tons of presumptives for that veteran specifically, and he refuses to. And he's already in his retirement age, and I hate to see it. It sucks,
Yeah,
really.
my it's kind of a canned response, but my thoughts on that are a little blue. But
Yeah.
what my thoughts on that though are really, if you worked for any other organization, and I think I've said this to you before, Clay, if you worked for any other organization and that organization said, hey, guess what? We're going to give you whatever, $1 million worth of stock that we're going to hold on to until you hit 5 years. Once you hit that 5 year mark, you're vested and it's yours. You can leave the company, sell the stock, whatever, it's yours. But we want those 5 years from you. That is essentially what happens here with your VA benefits, right? You serve your time, your benefits are there. And if you worked in any other organization and they had this $1 million of benefit, you wouldn't say, hey, my 5 years is up. It's been great. I did it for all the right reasons. And I'm glad that this thing got off the ground. I'm going to move on with my life. What about your $1 million, sir? I'm good. Don't
Yeah.
need it.
Yeah.
Go ahead and keep that and move on with your life. You wouldn't do it. Nobody would do that ever. Nobody's taking half of their income and saying, you know what, company, I don't need it. You could keep part of that, right? Nobody's giving their money back to the organizations in which they worked. So this is exactly the same. And here's the sad part, Clay. I think that it's because our expectations were not of this, we joined without knowing that any of this stuff really existed. We may have known, look, you're going to get school and you can get a home loan. Cool. And you go join, right? You don't know anything else. So it doesn't exist in your mind. Then as you're transitioning out, nobody really explains it. Even the VA person, and I'm sure you sat there and listened to them give their PowerPoint brief on VA benefits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which they don't embody the true impact and the reality of VA benefits as they're going through that PowerPoint, right? So nobody's left with this, oh my gosh, those are my benefits. That's awesome. Nobody's saying that at the end of their thing because it's wah, wah, nah, next slide, nah, 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 next slide. So we get out with this idea of that there's nothing there for us. And then when somebody else tells us about it, it seems almost too good to be true. And then maybe somebody's taking advantage of something somewhere. And then it goes back to what we've talked about before. All those stupid VA disability compensate. Well, look, I got my hands and feet. It's not for me. And if you're on it and you have your hands and feet, you're wrong. No, that's not how it works. So anyway, I'm getting on my soapbox. It just really bothers me because your guy, right? Your buddy that you know. It's like, really? Come on. So anyway, I'm gonna kick it back to you. See if you have any
Yeah.
last thoughts.
The Gulf War now transitioning to post 9/11, and there's tons of overlap there, obviously. But the most common by far, and the 4 you listed are 4 of the 5. So good job on that. Are sinusitis, rhinitis, bronchitis. Bronchitis is going to rope these two together.
Mhm.
Sinusitis and rhinitis are separate. Okay,
Mhm.
so you can have 10% for sinusitis, you can have 30% for um, rhinitis, right, or vice versa. Now, I already know someone's going to say, well, mine says sinusitis with rhinitis at 10%. It's probably because one's 0, one's 10. They're just going to lump it all together, right? So whenever you have two compensable ratings, meaning 10% or higher, they're going to be separate. Bronchitis is going to rope those together. Don't just take that at face value. If you want to figure out why, then figure out what bronchitis is, right? And then you have asthma and COPD, and both of those are roped in with sleep apnea. So those all share the same rating. Now, there is a 38 CFR code, and I forgot what it is, where additional ratings can be given for sleep apnea and asthma. And it's rare. It's not, I'm not going to say it's rare, it's uncommon, right? And so if you have a CPAP at 50% for sleep apnea and you have 30% for asthma, the VA is going to concede and just rope your asthma under sleep apnea, right? Which is 50%. But in some cases where your asthma symptoms are severe, still at 30%, the VA can say, hey, these are still roped together, but we're going to give you 70% for sleep apnea and asthma. And so there's a 38 CFR code that allows for that. You don't have to make that determination. The VA makes that determination, okay? Just small little nuances like that. But those are the top 5: sinusitis, rhinitis, bronchitis, asthma, and COPD, and then of course IBS under that MUCMI. And so,
Right.
um, looking at the changes for IBS, I think it's relevant because if you have IBS, there's now a 10 and 20% in addition to the 30% rating, right? So you have 10, 20, 30 for IBS. And if you're rated for GERD already, and we already posted this one, but you have to make that determination if you want to, touch the GI tract ratings. Generally speaking, and I'll just give you a one-liner up front, and we'll link the video down below that really explains it. If you have GERD at 30 or 60%, I probably wouldn't touch it, to be honest with you, unless you have esophageal stricture, right? But that's the one-liner. If you don't have GERD and you have IBS, go for it 1,000%. There's really no reason you should not. But those are really my last thoughts on the post 9/11 Gulf War era. Well, I guess this is my second to last thought because here's my last thought. It kind of gets back. I think you opened my eyes a little bit that you said, the Vietnam veteran, Korea and Vietnam, looking at their presumptive list is wild, right? Absolutely. Like if you've taken sinusitis, rhinitis, and you're going to compare it to hypertension and prostate cancer and other cancers and Parkinson's, I mean, the Korea Vietnam era severity is going to outweigh Gulf War post 9/11, right? Not that it's a competition or anything, but it does make me think of, okay, well, what the 70s was 50 years ago, which is insane. 50 years from today, what cancers are going to be in addition to Gulf War post 9/11? And so it kind of goes back to doubling down on what we said at the very, very beginning. If you have a cancer, right, submit the claim. Let the VA collect that data, go with that, and then heck, 50 years from now, just like the Vietnam era or Gulf War post 9/11 era, we might see, Parkinson's or non-Hodgkin's or whatever cancers are out there added to the Gulf War post 9/11 list. To be honest with you, I hope we don't. I hope the data is not there to suggest that. But heck, if that's the thing, let's get it connected. So just blanketly saying, if you have a cancer in a serious condition, submit the claim. That's about it.
Right.
Yeah. Those are
And there's
really my closing thoughts.
yeah, and there's 11 cancers listed for Gulf War post 9/11 currently, and cancers sometimes don't show up right away. Right, it's years later that they could show up. So just be aware and don't stick your head in the sand and pretend that it's never going to show up. Be get checked and that type of stuff, and make sure that you're on top of it, because like I said, you want to catch it early if it does show up. And if it does show up, you need to file for it. So now what? Now what's the question? So look, my suggestion is, if you're watching this video and if you're in service currently and you're getting ready to get out, is start being prepared, right? Getting prepared, getting the diagnosis, going and getting seen by a doctor, ideally while you're in service. If you feel weird doing it with your military, doctor, then try to find somebody out in the public and go out there and spend a couple $100 for the diagnosis, just to kind of get that front loaded. They don't care, the VA don't care what doctor saw you. They just care that a doctor saw you, and the date of your diagnosis, if it's in your window of active duty, you're solid.
Yeah.
So you will save yourself a lot of heartache. You can file what's called a BDD claim. That's the benefits delivery of discharge. You can file that up to 6 months prior to your discharge, but no later than 3 months to your discharge. So you have that 3 to 6 month window to file your claim. Take advantage of that if you have that opportunity to do so. If you're getting out on a medical type of a discharge, you have two choices. Most people now are selecting the IDES, which is the Integrated Disability Evaluation System, but there is also the LDES, Legacy Disability Evaluation System. Why would somebody want to utilize the Legacy? There's only a couple cases. Maybe you got a family emergency, your mother, your father, something like that, is in need of severe help, and you need to get out as fast as possible. That will speed that process up. Or if you got a job offer and they want you to start as soon as possible, you can elect LDES. IDES integrates in the VA claim process, and so therefore it takes a little bit longer. Do they get it right all the time? No. They're going to leave stuff off of your claim, so you need to be prepared later to be able to file another claim with anything that they may have missed, the person who's going to help you with that. If you're out and it's within that 1 year period, keep an eye on those presumptives from the 1 year period. Go get diagnosed right away. And then lastly, if you're already outside of the 1 year window and you're like us, if you meet any of these presumptives, or you think that you may have something, but you're just not diagnosed yet, throw in an intent to file just to kind of preserve a date as you're getting all your documentation. If you're already diagnosed for something, for example, hypertension for Vietnam or rhinitis for Gulf War, you already have the diagnosis. That's great. You just need to pick up a few things. You can't find your DD-214, that type of stuff, and it's going to take you a little time to locate it or order it. Put in that intent to file. You could mail it in. You can do it online. You can call the VA directly and let them know that you want to put in an intent to file. That gives you a year to get your stuff together to file that claim and preserve that date. With that, just wanted to make sure that people got it and know it and understand that there is a call to action. The call to action is to get the benefits that you deserve. That's really it. And with that, I know you said you had your final thought 2 times. Do you have a third final thought, Clay?
My third final thought. If you have a condition and you don't know it's presumptive or not, but you believe it's caused from service, gather the evidence, get diagnosed, submit the claim. You don't have to understand the weeds of the M21, TAC 1, or 38 CFR. Just submit the evidence-based claim, especially for exposure. Exposure is its whole other thing outside of presumptives, right? But what matters is the evidence-based claim. No diagnosis, no claim. You got to have the diagnosis. If there's one thing you hear from this, is get diagnosed. Do not submit a presumptive without a diagnosis, because you will be denied. That's all I have to say.
Absolutely. And look, and if you're not sure if it's on a presumptive list because you can't find it or whatever, like Clay said, file it. Worst case scenarios is they're going to deny you for Nexus, right? Because you're filing everything else. So they have your diagnosis, they have your time in service, they have all of that. If it's not a presumptive condition, then they may come back to you and say, hey, look, you're denied because you don't have the Nexus. So then you can start working on that and still preserve your effective date by working on the Nexus piece. So it's not the end of the world. With that, thank you guys so much for watching. We truly appreciate you. Thank you for all the support as we grow this channel and reach out to more and more veterans, spouses, and dependents. Without you, it's all pointless. So it's a collective effort for us, by us, and we really appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, if we don't take care of each other, something went wrong.